Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It is May the 23rd, day 144. We're in 1 Chronicles 21. So the interesting thing about the chronological Bible is that you'll get stories basically side by side. You may get one set one day and one set the next day. You may get, like the Samuel or Kings and Chronicles another time. This story you're going to hear twice. And on the front side, I think it's, so this coming Sunday, so this is the 23rd, so the 29th, I guess Monday's the 23rd, the 29th, we will preach from the comparable story from 2 Kings. And the stories are very, very similar. They give the same basic details, except for one what might be considered large difference. And I think we're going to have to talk about it both in the Sermon and on the podcast, because there are a lot of people who will be in the building that may not listen to the podcast, and there'll be people who listen to the podcast that may not be in the building for the service. So let me read a couple of verses and then we'll talk. It says, Satan rose up against Israel and caused David to take a census of the people of Israel. So David said to Joab and the commanders of the army, take a census of all the people of Israel, from Beersheba in the south to Dan in the north, and bring me a report so I may know how many there are. But Joab replied, may the Lord increase the number of his people 100 times over. But why, my lord the king, do you want to do this? Are they not all your servants? Why must you cause Israel to sin? So where I want us to address first is it says, Satan rose up against Israel and caused David to take a census. So Satan caused David to take a census. 2 Samuel, though, says that God caused David to take the census. He was mad and caused him to do it. It's what God was angry. Is this a resolvable conflict? Can it be both? Does it have to be either or? Is it only God caused him to do it? Only Satan caused him to do it? Is one of these recorders wrong, or it's just their perspective of it?
I'll go first. So my thought is, as God is in control of everything, right? God created everything. He is in control. He's all powerful, all knowing. My thought is that God most likely allowed Satan to do this. He could stop Satan from He could have stopped Satan from interfering or from trying to get David to do this, but God allowed it because of God's plan. So God allowed Satan to do this, allowed Satan to. So I think it is both parts. I think God is partial. I mean, God is, he allows things to happen, and Satan is the one who carries out for you from 1 Chronicles. So that's my interpretation of it. That's what I would expect.
Yeah, I wouldn't be a lot of different from that perspective, in that I think they work together. If God chooses to allow Satan to work through or stir up someone, as this says that he did David, then so be it. Even in these two various passages on the back side of the chapter, when they wind up trying to resolve the plague that comes as a result, there are two different names for the individuals, which is one and the same person. But one, he's called one thing in this chapter, he's called Ornan, I think, in the passage that you referred to earlier.
Yeah, so I think if we had two recordings of the book of Job, they might look similar to this. Mm-hmm. I think some of it has to do with your theological point of view when you record something, your view of life, your own personal circumstances. I think the writer in Chronicles assumes that everybody knows God's in control, and Satan is the instigator for evil. And so he's going to attribute the evil instigation to Satan. The writer of
2
Samuel might have a different view. They might have a view that, okay, we need to acknowledge that God ultimately is in control, and this isn't happening unless God allows it. And so I don't know that they have to be in conflict. I think you can resolve the conflict. I think it just depends on the person's personal point of view, how they handle it, how they're going to respond.
Yeah,
to
because
it.
it wouldn't be a lot different. Truthfully, when we tell our own stories, our perspective is, the devil did this to me. He caused this accident, this incident, and you could also tell it from the perspective, well, God is sovereign, and He allowed this to happen in my life. Well,
And He used it for His glory.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
I don't see it as a lot of difference.
Yeah, I mean, Paul's thorn in the flesh clearly got used for his benefit.
Yeah.
He wanted it gone.
Yeah.
But God didn't allow it. So Joab warns him. He says, "Hey, slow down. Why are you going to cause us to sin?" We're not given a lot of insight as to why it would be a sin prior to. We're not told. What's wrong with counting people. Or we. If that's the case. A lot of churches I've walked into have a sin board right beside the stage. Yeah,
it's updated.
That's right.
A sin board?
A sin board. Yeah, because they count people and they put the number on the board. The attendance.
Yeah.
You've never seen an attendance board in a church?
No, I haven't.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Wow.
People and dollars go up there.
Yeah, the amount of offering for the week and the number of people. You haven't been in too many churches then.
Yeah. That's like a Twitch stream. Have you heard of Twitch before?
Yes,
People live stream
it's a
things.
game.
It shows the subscriber number and the amount of people watching at the time.
Right.
So it's kind of like that.
Almost like Facebook Live.
Yeah. The church was first. Yes.
You say that in jest, but there is a danger, even in church, that we focus on numbers, whether they be attendance or dollars.
Butts and books is what I call it.
Yeah, and because we tend to overemphasize the importance or significance of those things, those numbers, rather than who God is and what He chooses to do. And so it shouldn't be such a stretch for us to be able to get ourselves in this story and understand that there's danger when we depend on numbers. It brings some sense of satisfaction to us, some arrogance, overconfidence.
Yeah, so Joab tells him he shouldn't do it, or warns him against doing it.
He warns him.
I do think there are times as a leader, you have to ignore the advice and go forward. I think you just have to, because everybody's view is skewed. But there are other times that you should listen. How do you determine when to listen and when not to listen?
I think if you know the person well, because like we talked about this last time, like with like people who gossip. If someone's gossiping all the time, like probably not the kind of person you want to be listening to. If it's someone who lies, they lie, probably not the kind of person to listen to. But this is someone who has, before we've seen multiple times, has shown to have a lot of wisdom and has given great recommendations and has spoken has said some really important things to David that have been very helpful to him in his kingdom. And so I feel like when someone that we trust or someone that has a lot of wisdom and we know that that they live biblically, I think those are some big things that, depending on the person, I think that can help us a lot to know, should we listen to this person or not.
History with that person, track record, have they proven the fact that the information or what they bring to my attention is for the good? It's the right motivation behind it. At a minimum, even if he didn't agree with him or didn't want to take his advice, at a minimum, I think it should have caused David to take a moment to at least pray or seek counsel from God and say, okay,
pause.
Yeah, exactly.
Pause.
Just take a moment and let's get a better handle on this.
For me, the word in here, the wording, the one piece of wording that takes it from advice to warning is sin. You're causing us to sin.
Yeah.
If it's a matter of preference, I like this, I don't like this, I'm willing to take this risk, I'm not willing to take this risk. For example, if we were sitting in an elders meeting and there was an elder or some elders who said, that doesn't seem like the best thing to do. It may not stop me from doing it. But if they said, this is sin, I should stop. I should pause.
Yeah.
I should at least pray about it. Like,
Absolutely.
what does God's word have to say about this?
Yeah.
That is, I think that's the kicker here, is that he says, why are you causing us to sin?
Yeah, and there seems to be zero indication that David even tried to engage Joab in a further how. Tell me how it's sin. What's the problem with this? He just, the next verse gives us insight to he'd already made his mind up.
Yeah. And so he gets his count. God's upset. God gets angry. And God sends Gad to tell him you got 3 choices. So by the time you get to verse 11, it says, so Gad came to David and said, these are the 3 choices the Lord has given you. You may choose 3 years of famine, 3 months of destruction by the sword of your enemies, 3 days of severe plague, as an angel of the Lord brings devastation throughout the land of Israel. Decide what answer I should give the Lord who sent me. Now,
Which would you pick?
no, well, the question that I have is, do you think the Lord gives us punishment options?
I knew you were going to ask that too, and I did not prepare for a question like that. I'm just getting to know your mind a bit better. I knew you'd ask
That's
something
dangerous.
like that. Yeah, that's a wild question. What do you think, Pastor Jay?
I've never, to my recollection, had it laid out so clearly as if you choose A, this, if you choose B. But obviously when we do disobey, we sin, then we are left with consequences and options to choose. We're going to suffer to different degrees, and depending on the type of action, the type of sin that we've committed and rebelled against God. If I do this, then this may be the result if I do it this. And so in that sense, we do have options, but I can't recall a time when they were spelled out this clearly in advance.
I agree with you. I don't think it's ever like that. I've never had a prophet come to me or someone or a seer come to me and tell me the things. But there have been times when maybe I've made a poor, as an example, a poor financial decision, and I had to make a choice if I either had to sell this, you could take a second mortgage on your house, or you could you have options, but none of them are good necessarily. All of them are going to put you in a more difficult place than you're in now. But that's
Bad,
the price.
worse, or worse.
Yes, and that's kind of the price you just have to pay. You have to use your wisdom to decide, because you'll have to take one of those decisions. And like that exact specific scenario, you're gonna have to choose something to get out of the rut that you put yourself in.
Yeah, so I've never had like this. I've never had like God, prophet, whatever, say come down. These are going to be the choices. But I can think back to as a kid, my dad giving me options. Like you can use this for a week, lose this for a week, or you can get a spanking with a paddle.
Yeah.
100% of the time, I take the spanking.
Because it was over with.
It was done.
Yeah.
I was done with it. I can move on, and that's kind of what David chooses here. His reasoning for it is slightly different than it's over with, but he chooses the shorter period of time. He says, Gad told him he could have 3 years of famine. Nobody would have died.
Right.
It's possible. That's right.
Years.
Just suffering for 3 years. 3 months of destruction from the enemies. Some people would die. Or 3 days of severe plague from the angel of the Lord, bringing devastation throughout the land. It seems like he chose the option with the most loss. It's not likely, because what does it say? 70,000 people die as a result of this. He chose the one with the most loss, but the shortest term. I'm just telling you. So let me tell you what my reasoning for this is.
Okay.
I believe he said I'd rather be in the hands of God. But whatever the devastation, if it's greater, I've got 3 years, 362 days to recover what was lost. Whereas if I take 3 years of famine, God only knows how far behind I'm going to be. And so one of the reasons I wrestle with David is there are similarities in David that I see in myself. I'd rather get it over with and start again. Burn. I think I used this terminology in one service recently. I said I'd rather burn the whole thing down and start over again than I had to limp through it. That's that's the kind of way I see it. And I think he would rather, instead of having 3 months of fighting, give me 3 days. Let's move on, and whatever we got. No matter how bad it is, we can recover from it. You know, I've always felt that way. You know, if I was in like Job's shoes, I would lose sleep for a night or two. Then I'm going to get up and we're going to start building a new house. You know, that's just kind of how I approach things.
But did David actually choose? I mean, he puts himself, it says, let me fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great. Don't let me fall in human hands. It says the Lord sent a plague. And was this the least, or was it the greatest, based on God's mercy of what came to him?
Yeah, I don't think 70,000 die with the other two options.
We don't know.
I know.
We don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
because 3 years of famine could have got to the point where 70,000,
Everybody
right,
died.
would have
That's
been
right. You don't know.
but a minuscule thing. You know, we don't know if they'd have had 3 months destruction by the sword of their enemies. You know, where they literally were almost helpless. That many more. So we don't know. It seems like a huge number, and if you're one of them, it is a huge number. But
Yeah, if you're one of the 70,000.
that's right. But at the same time,
One's a big number when you're the one.
when you're it, and that's it. That's all you need. But perhaps this is God's grace and mercy here, that it. You know, I hate to even say it this way, that there's only 70,000 that die as a result of it.
Yeah.
You know, because it could have been so much more. And you know, the mere fact that he said, "Let me fall into the hands of the Lord," because he was, it says, in a desperate situation. You know, that's not a decision I'm qualified to make, Lord. I'm here at your mercy. And yet, so many people had to suffer because of his decision.
Yeah, that's right. Families. I mean, it's not the people that die. The people that die, it's over with.
Yeah.
It's the
right.
families that are left.
Right,
The
they
fathers,
carry on for generations.
children
Yeah.
that don't have fathers, wives that don't have husbands. You know.
So I have a question to pose to you. What was Joab's responsibility if he perceived it was sin, and he got command from the king to do this, and he even challenged David on it? Where do you take a stand to say, no, I'm not doing that. I refuse because this is wrong.
Yeah, well, I think so. The key word, as I said a while ago, is sin.
Mm-hmm.
If it's just a preference, I think Joab's obligated.
I agree.
But if he believed he was causing the people to sin, he was causing David to sin, and there was going to be suffering from it.
So is he complicit in
Yes.
in this at this point once
The
he
answer is
knows
yes.
when he knows it's sin?
Yeah.
I agree.
I mean, you can go to, I mean, how many people went to prison at Watergate? How many people go to prison in general because they're complicit to something? You
Yeah.
know, they may be following orders, but they've
Right.
committed a crime. You know.
Yeah.
So it goes on and says he builds an altar. I think we could spend so much time here, and we're going to talk about it in the sermon. What is the importance of the altar? Not just in this story, but in general. What's significant about an altar? Is it still significant today? Is an altar still significant?
I think it's very significant, not that we build them physically, you know, at our homes or our backyards, but altar was a place of sacrifice. You know, it was a place where typically animals would die, blood was shed. It was a place where man reconnected and recommitted to God. And I think it's crucial that we do that on a regular, reoccurring basis.
There are things that we still need to sacrifice in our lives, things that we need to give up that are either doing us a disservice or are not bringing us any closer to God, helping us reach more people for God. I think there are things that we just have to bring to the altar, essentially, or bring to God and just lay it down and give it up. And so I think there is still a purpose to going to God and to obviously going to God, but also, like you're saying, not necessarily physical, like a physical altar, but a place like in your heart just to get rid of what you don't need or get rid of the things that are holding you back.
Yeah. I even physical altars I find to be significant. I grew up in churches where the front was the altar. I have tried to think back if there was one I'm pretty sure there was at least one church that had an altar railing, but most of them had a stage, not too dissimilar to ours, with a kneeling step is how I would describe it. Oh, and yeah, there were a couple of churches my dad pastored that had altar benches, that would have been where people would have come and prayed at. But even here, I find times where when I really feel a need to pray, that I'll just walk in this building in the dark, sit down at the front by the stage, because there's something spiritual from the physical act. That's how I would describe it. Being at a physical place, doing a physical thing that matters. So David won't take it for free. What things in our life should cost us something, and why should we pay a price?
I think everything good in life should cost something. Everything of value should cost us something. I think there's sacrifices that need to be made. I mean, even having a child, there's a lot of big sacrifices in terms of time, money, effort that goes into that. Even when serving other people, there are things you must sacrifice in order to do that. I think if it doesn't deserve any sort of sacrifice, if it doesn't deserve any kind of payment, I don't know if it's really worth our time necessarily.
Yeah, I don't think we value or appreciate anything that doesn't cost us something. The more we have to put into it, the more I think we value and appreciate the results on the backside.
Yeah, so I kind of take the view that everything costs us something. There's a trade. You're always trading X for X. Your time for money, money for time, money for help, time for help. There's an exchange medium going on. And if David doesn't pay the price for the altar, there's going to be a different price to pay at a different time. It's kind of like your help. You can either pay the price to keep your help, or you can pay the price to get it back. Yeah. But there's a price to pay.
Yeah, either way.
So, any other things you want to talk about where this passage is concerned? All right, let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the reminder to listen to advisors that are offering us warning, to trust in you, to be willing to lay our life in your hands, to be willing to sacrifice on the altar the things that need to be sacrificed to be removed from our life. I pray, God, that you would give us wisdom in the things that we're supposed to do and not do. Help us, God, to be willing to walk after you and to follow after you and to do what you would have us to do. In Jesus' name.